And now I'm delighted to introduce our speaker for today, Ingrid Kirst with Ingrid Kirst Consulting. Ingrid, take it away.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Great to see all of you. Get my screen up here. Okay. So do a little introduction and get into some content here. So as you all know, I work with nonprofit organizations on leadership development. So I work with boards of directors, I work with executive directors, and I do a lot around succession planning. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is a lot of the lessons that come out of succession planning with nonprofits can apply to businesses as well. I'm not going to get into the financial and legal aspects of transferring a business to another family member or selling a business. That's not my area of expertise. But there's a lot around planning so that you can have a successful business and be able to sell that to somebody. That planning work that goes into that that really makes a difference. So when I start talking about succession planning with nonprofits, I always get, our executive director is not planning to leave anytime soon. We don't need to talk about succession planning. Same for business owners. They tend to think, well, I don't need to worry about that. I'm just going to work for forever. And what I try to really talk about is succession planning is far more than just who's going to lead your business or your nonprofit in the future. If you have staff, planning for those positions to turn over. If you have an emergency situation, that's part of succession planning. So let's plan for that instead of just having a crisis appear. So as I'm going through and talking about things, if you have questions or comments, feel free to stick them in the chat box and I'll check in on that regularly so that we can have somewhat of a dialogue. I know Steve's got everybody muted for the time being, but feel free to use that chat box. So I think one of the reasons I like talking about succession planning now is I think that the pandemic has really made it a lot easier to talk about. It's brought to the forefront that, things happen. Crisis can happen. Nobody can predict it. It also has helped us, just everything's kind of up in the air right now. Nobody's really sure what's going to happen next. We don't know, and we're going to go back to having big events, getting together in person. And so I think people are more willing to think about new plans and new ways of doing things. Just things happen. In my years of running nonprofits, I had one employee who got hauled off to jail once. I had another employee just decided he wasn't coming to work anymore. The biggest crisis that I dealt with was, you might remember back in 2015 when Lincoln was having some serious flooding issues. I was running community crops at the time, and our office was about, say, 500 feet from the Salt Creek. And I rode my bike along that Salt Creek levee to and from work all the time. It was huge. There was no way that creek was ever going to flood. Well, we woke up one morning not being able to get to our office because the streets all the way around were completely flooded with water. And it just happened to be 2 days before a humongous fundraiser. And nobody knew, was the water going to keep rising? It hadn't gone over the levee yet, but it was close. And so I had a foolhardy, young, strong man who worked for me who said, I'll go in. So he waded into the office and got all the computers up on desks and got the essential supplies I needed for that fundraiser in case we weren't able to get to the office before then. And then we waited. The next morning, the water was gone. We were able to drive to the office, no problem, but that debris line was 6 feet from our door. And so we were very close to losing everything. And of course, we didn't have flood insurance because we never thought that was going to happen. So all sorts of things can happen. And I think the most important thing is to plan for redundancy, backups, so that if something happens, you have a plan in place. As you look at the materials on business continuity planning, succession planning, you know, they'll list all sorts of possible things, and very few of them list pandemics as a thing to plan for. But if you're planning for other possibilities, then you're going to be ready for pandemics or whatever comes at you. So if you look at the statistics, 60% of businesses don't have a succession plan. And even more critically, 40% of businesses don't reopen after a disaster. So, you know, just thinking about our current situation, how many businesses are we going to lose because they just can't get to their customers? Travel businesses, for one, a lot of restaurants. It's hard to plan for that eventuality. You wouldn't think that something like this would happen. So we're going to talk about business continuity planning first. Just kind of terms, I guess. Business continuity planning is basically, you know, planning for the emergency. In nonprofits, we tend to use the term emergency succession planning. So this is just planning for a crisis, having everything in hand so you're ready for that. And then towards the end, I'll talk more about succession planning. And with a nonprofit, that's more about how are you going to transition leadership. For a business, that's going to be more about how do you transition ownership of the business. So, you know, what are some of the risks and that you might face? And I've already talked about some of these. Feel free to add them into the chat box as other ones that you think about. But, you know, you've got your basic technology risks. You know, your computers, something happens to a hard drive. The internet stops working, cell phone system stops working. I mean, that has happened a few years ago. All of the Sprint network phones for a few hours were not working in Lincoln. You can have physical things like a fire, a flood, tornado, obviously, is something we can have here in Lincoln. Another risk, if you are somebody who creates products, is the supply chain can be disrupted. You can't get materials that you need to make your products. And then, of course, the biggest and the most unknown is people. You know, things happen with staff, with your key contacts that just nobody could have predicted. So there's all of those things that can get in the way of having a successful business. So let's talk about some of the solutions. So we've got first and most important step is to document things. And you probably already have done some of this, thinking these things through with your business. Starting with your key staff, if you do have staff, you know, who are those people who are absolutely essential to keep your business working? And this is probably certainly an area where you really have had to think about this. As we implement social distancing, as businesses closed, who do you really need to keep your business operational? What are those key people? And do you have contact information for them? You know, multiple ways to contact them. And do you have backup plans for, you know, if one person can't run payroll, who's the person who is the backup, and making sure they have access to what they need? If you don't have staff, you're certainly working with people outside your business who are going to be key. That could be, you know, somebody like an attorney or an accountant. Your website person can be really critical. You know, if somebody hacks your website, you need to be able to reach your website person immediately. But that could also be your customers. If you have a small number of customers and you need to make sure that you have multiple ways to contact them, thinking that through. And having not only just contact information, but thinking about backup. So, you know, going back to the website, who is somebody else who could make changes to your website if something happened and you couldn't reach your main person? Do you have the login information to update your website? Similarly with technology, obviously, backing up your computer regularly is key. And then testing that, if you delete a file, can you recover it from backup? What is that process like? I'd say that's probably one of the most common things that happened. Last week we talked about cybersecurity, so that can, cause problems for your technology, but just simply, hard drives go bad, computers are dropped, all kinds of things can happen. And we are, especially these days, really relying on that technology and all of the information stored on them. So how are we backing that up? But also just things like, your password list. I certainly, when I was getting ready to leave my position at Community Crops, really made sure I had all my passwords in one spot, and it sure made my life easier. I wish I'd done it far sooner. And I had backup copies of it, stored that offsite with a trusted person. And because, we need those passwords. I can tell you, I came in as an interim executive director in an organization, and so I was there for 3 months running this organization. They were in somewhat of a crisis mode, and I spent a lot of time wasted trying to track down passwords and login information to I don't know how many different websites I needed just to find out some basic information. So making sure that information is securely stored but available is really important. And then also under technology, if you have specialized equipment, specialized software you need access to, what if that software was no longer available? And then thinking through what are your critical supplies and equipment. So that could be all sorts of things. The office equipment could be, the trucks that your business uses. What are those critical things that you need to have, and how can you plan for if they weren't available? So just taking that time, and like I said, you've probably already been thinking this through. During the pandemic, as you think through, well, how do we do things differently? So take some time to write that down. Some other things to identify, just thinking through what are your critical documents. And for everybody, this is different, but banking information, accounts and loan information, articles of incorporation, legal papers. What are those documents that you would absolutely need if the one site where you would store them at was not available? How would you have them stored offsite? For some businesses, identifying an alternate location. So where could you do your work? Obviously right now, a lot of us have found that we can work from home just fine. People have made it work. I was lucky to be a few months ahead of the curve because I had transitioned to my home office back in November and really made sure that this time I set it up right. But really thinking that through, and what kind of equipment would you need? I have a friend who's an accountant, runs an accounting firm, and they do not have access to their software from offsite. They have continued to go in. They made that choice. They knew that it was not going to be possible, but it was because it was going to be too expensive to have all the security they needed to be able to work from home. So it was a conscious choice, but it's been challenging for them. And then finally, putting together a communication plan. So this can be communicating with your staff, with any key contacts that you have, customers, what would that look like? But it can also be just to spend a little time thinking about if there was a crisis and who talks to the media. So for example, say you have a employee who's caught embezzling and the media starts calling and wanting to know what's going on. You don't want another staff person talking to the media. You want to make sure that you as the owner is the person who talks to the media. So just thinking that through, what would you need to have in place? And then the final main area to think about is your operating manual. And this gets a little bit beyond the crisis situation, but it can be really beneficial. So this is taking the things that you do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis and writing them down, and how you do them, what your key deadlines are, who the contacts are, and the resources you need to do those things. So for example, payroll taxes, if that's something that you do yourself, having written down when those are due, how you do those, so that if somebody else needed to do it, they could. And what I really found, again, I did this as I was getting ready to leave my position at Community Crops. I'd been there 11 years, so I had a lot of knowledge in my head. And, I thought I was doing fine. Well, when I actually took the time to write all this stuff down in one document, I found it just saved me a ton of time. Because there was always something that I didn't remember it. I'd have to go look it up and remember which document it is in or which random email. I now had one document with all the information that I needed all the time. And it made my life so much easier. But the other advantage to putting something together like this is that it lets you really think through, what are the key things I do, and do I need to be doing them? What are ways that I could do things differently? And again, the pandemic has really helped us to think that through. I was talking to an older friend the other day who said, I decided to pay some of my bills online, so I didn't have to go to the post office and get stamps. I've been after him for years to do this. It's just, okay, let's think things through. Let's make life a little simpler. As a business owner, thinking through what you can do, and also what other people can do. So maybe this is a time to start thinking about, what could you do to outsource? So for example, accounting is a really good one, payroll. Is it time to start outsourcing that, because you are spending a ton of time on that and you could have an expert do that? Managing your website's another great one. Is it time to maybe have somebody else do that so it can look better and be more efficient, free up some of your time? So as you're creating that operating manual, it gives you a chance to really think through those tasks that you do and whether it's the best use of your time. Check and see if there's any questions. Not so far. Okay. Feel free to stick some questions in there. So then you've got your business continuity plan. All of these pieces together. So putting together your all of those things that you've identified, all that contact information, what you would do in a crisis, what your backup sources are, and then making sure that everybody who needs that has a copy. So that might be simply just, if it's just you, it might just be your own plan, and maybe you have a trusted friend store it somewhere else so that there's a copy somewhere else. But maybe it's you have key employees and they need to have multiple copies of that. And keep it up to date. That's the other big thing. Any plan, it's only as good as the information in it. And so it just making sure that when suppliers change, when you change your bank, when you change your passwords, that information is being kept up to date so that it's going to be useful to you down the road. So if anybody's got any questions on business continuity planning or any thoughts, feel free to comment or put it in the chat box.
Ingrid, could you talk a little bit about key man insurance?
About what kind of insurance?
Key man insurance.
I don't know what that is.
Okay, Steve, are you hearing?
Yeah, I can chime in on that. If you have more than you have to Well, in that, I was that person in one of the businesses I started. I wasn't the president of the company, but I was the number two. I brought in business. I had a bunch of accounts that I managed, and I was very important to the operation. I took care of the financials and the accounting and so forth. So the president of the company took out a key person insurance policy on me. It's basically a life insurance policy. And if I was walking across the street and got hit by a bus, that policy would have paid off to the company, because my sudden loss to the company would have been a hardship to the company. There would have been a loss of revenue, and it would have taken them a while to find a replacement and get them up to speed. So this insurance policy was taken out with the company as the beneficiary, and that can be a huge thing. You can also set up insurance policies to buy out shares. So if the number two person in your company owns part of the company, you can set up a buy-sell agreement so that if somebody does die suddenly, the remaining partner has the money to then buy out their shares to pay the estate. So insurance can be a huge thing in this type of planning. And I
Go ahead.
I just want to chime in. I think Ingrid covered this topic incredibly well. And as the director of the center and being in the business community as long as I have seen companies that had continuity plans in place and tragedy hit and they handled it very, very well. And then I've seen the opposite, where companies were not prepared for a sudden change, and it was a crippling thing. And if you are I know a lot of you are solo operators, you don't have any employees, doesn't matter. You still need, if not a continuity plan, maybe if something suddenly happens to you, the business just closes, but you still need to have somebody that can access your computer and close out your accounts and knows your password. So please, put together some sort of plan in case that were to happen. If for no other reason, to make life easier for your family members that survive you.
I had an experience and was working for a pharmacy group. And in a pharmacy, you can't open the doors legally if you don't have a pharmacist. So the man that owned our pharmacy group was a pharmacist, and he passed away suddenly. Well, the stores would have had to have closed had there not been a key person insurance policy, because that key person insurance policy then enabled us to hire a pharmacist to open up. So dependent on the kind of business you have, there may be legal ramifications. And so that insurance policy was crucial for us not to just be able to fold the stores and to even be able to function.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think it's, just even to have that conversation can be really hard. And so, the fact that that business owner had the foresight to have key person insurance is really important, because nobody wants to talk about, well, I might die, but the reality is we will. But even more basic, we're going to all leave our jobs. We're going to all leave our businesses at some point. Or, right now, we might get sick. And, this virus, from what I've heard, if you get sick and you have symptoms, you're pretty crappy feeling for a while. You don't want to work. What's going to cover your business for those few weeks? Who can do the work? What's going to happen?
Excellent. Any other questions out there for Ingrid?
I had a few other things I can cover if you want.
We've got a couple more minutes, yes.
Yeah, and Jody makes a good point that, things can change. If you know, maybe right now you don't have any staff, but you hire somebody down the road, then you've got new things to think through. And Jeff's point is good, that you need to include your passwords and login information in your will with legal instructions. Because that, you know, people take advantage of when they see obituaries in the paper and are trying to get electronic information. That can be a problem. Companies aren't willing to let other people access accounts. That can be really an issue. So it's good to think about that. I was working with a nonprofit that worked with, their financial person had done a lot of this work of putting together an operations manual for his work. This was a few months ago, and suddenly he was out on serious medical condition. He was not available. They could not talk to him. He was in the hospital. And so, okay, they pull out this manual and they're going to do things. And the first thing they wanted to do, the information said log in, and then said what to do. Well, they didn't have the login name, they didn't have the password, and it, you know, they had to waste a few hours getting that information. So it's, please save whoever's dealing with it after you some time. Find a way to keep that information recorded. There's a lot of good secure password management systems out there now. So the next part that I really emphasize with nonprofits, and is important for businesses too, is to really think about who those next leaders are in your organization. Obviously, if you're a solo entrepreneur, that's probably not going to be you, but you may want to transfer your business to somebody someday. And so how do you look for those leaders, and how do you help them develop? And really making that an intentional process of looking for people's skill sets, leadership potential, thinking through what could you delegate to people to help them learn new skills, but also get things off your plate. And I think right now is a really good time to be thinking about this. You know, leaders are made in crises. And so we've really been seeing that. If you, there's people stepping up now who maybe we wouldn't have thought of as leaders before. But they're the ones who are calm in a crisis. They have the information. They make sure they know what they're talking about. And those people are the ones who are reaching out to others and helping. So that's a really good way to start looking for who are those new leaders. And then business succession planning. I'm not going to get into this in detail. This is, as I said, you know, the details of how you are legally going to transfer your business and the financials is beyond my area of expertise. But what I think is really important is, you know, as we've already been talking about, thinking about that end now. So even if it's 20 years off that you want to retire, how can you prepare for that? What is it you want in 20 years? Do you want to sell your business and have income from it? All right, well, start that planning now. What's that going to look like? How are you going to get to that point? Maybe you have a family member that you think will want to take over the business. How are they going to be ready for that? How are you, what would be your ideal to sell it to them, for example? Or maybe you just would really like to see the service you're offering. You know, a lot of you offer services in the community that are really valuable, and you want that knowledge and information to continue. So thinking about that and how can you create that best possible outcome in the future. So that takes working obviously with legal and financial experts, but I think thinking through those questions now and starting to create that ideal scenario is really important. So welcome any other questions. Gave you my contact information there. Feel free if you know of any nonprofits that would like to just talk through any issues. It can be around leadership development, succession planning. Feel free to give them my name. I'm very available these days and just trying to be of service because nonprofits really need some help right now. So thank you.
Ingrid, thank you so much. We really appreciate your comments today. They are very timely. And this is a topic that gets ignored by many, many businesses. So thank you so much. And now, if you would you do us the honor of picking our coffee mug winner this week? So everybody hoist those mugs up there. Oh, look at Don's bringing it today.
Don, I don't think any coffee is going to fit in your mug there.
Oh yeah, I know, but this is founders have more drive, and so I'm saying that entrepreneurs like us have more drive. All right.
All right. That's hard to argue. Hoist them up there. Let Ingrid take a look.
Oh boy. Oh, we got some nice. Oh, Buddy's got a bunny. Quentin, yours is. Oh wait, there you go. Now I can see it. Well, I think I'll go with Don's. He's got the best message there.
All right, Don, you got it, man. And you sold it. I'm proud of you. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just a couple reminders before we sign off. Remember that today is Give to Lincoln Day, so visit their website and pick out one of those 450 charities, your favorites, and donate to them now and take advantage of those matching funds. Again, we're still looking for a couple of speakers for the end of June, and I hope you'll join us next week for Joe Sweeney. And then the following week on June 11th, we have Gitzi Loader and Pia Ivano with Inspired Results Consulting. But we need speakers for the 18th and the 25th. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay well and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, Steve.
Everybody.
Stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be healthy.
Nice seeing everyone.